The sheriff ordered her hanged until the widowed cowboy said, "I'll take her place." Wyoming Territory. Dawn broke behind a veil of thick fog, laying a pale silence across the small town square. Wooden buildings lined the edges like silent spectators, their signs dripping with dew. In the center, a crude platform rose above the cobblestones, a single noose swinging gently from the gallows. People gathered in heavy coats, murmuring under their breath. They had come not just to watch, but to bear witness to what the sheriff called a message to traitors. A figure in chains was led up the steps, Lydia Westwood. Her face was bruised, her lip cracked, but her back was straight. Her eyes, though clouded with the haze of pain and fatigue, burned with something deeper than defiance, resolve. 2 deputies held her arms. She did not resist. Her feet were bare, scraped from the rough cell floor, but she walked with the grace of someone who had already died once and come back with no fear of dying again. Sheriff Milton Crane stepped forward, wearing his finest coat, his badge polished like a mirror. He held a scroll and unrolled it with deliberate slowness. Lydia Westwood, found guilty of inciting rebellion and murdering Deputy Jessup Kane. The sentence, death by hanging. This shall serve as a lesson to all who oppose the peace and order of this territory. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman whispered, "She killed a lawman." "No," another replied. "She defended her land." A child tugged at his mother's coat. "Mama, why are they hurting her?" The mother said nothing. Among the crowd, near the edge of the fog, stood a man with a hat pulled low over gray-streaked hair. His face was rough, scarred beneath his beard. He wore a long coat, dust-covered boots, and gloves that had seen war and worse. His name was Wyatt Mercer, known once as Wyke to those who rode the rails with him, back when he was an outlaw with blood on his hands and fire in his past. He had been gone for years. Some said he died. Others said he vanished into the hills after his wife and daughter burned alive aboard a train meant for safety. He had taken another name, buried the old one. But now, he was back, and he was watching Lydia. Her head turned slightly as if she felt him there, though she could not see through the fog. She had known he would come, or perhaps she had only hoped. The sheriff gave a nod. The hangman adjusted the rope. The crowd stilled. Wyke took a breath, then stepped forward. His voice cut through the quiet like a gunshot. "Stop the rope. I'll take her place." The words landed heavy. Murmurs turned to gasps. Some laughed, unsure if they had heard correctly. Others stared. Sheriff Crane squinted through the mist. "Who said that?" Wyke pulled back his hood and met the lawman's eyes. "Wyatt Mercer," he said, clear and low. "And I stand in her stead." Crane's mouth curled into a slow grin. "Well, I'll be damned." He turned to the crowd, arms wide. "Seems we have ourselves a legend returned from the dead." Lydia's breath caught. "Wyke?" she whispered. The sheriff raised his voice. "Let it be known, the outlaw Wyatt Mercer offers himself for a woman marked by justice. Let the people decide if that's mercy or madness." The crowd was silent now. Even the child said nothing. The hangman looked to Crane, unsure. Wyke stepped up to the platform, removed his coat, and nodded toward Lydia. "You do not hang her today," he said. "Not while I still draw breath." And for a moment, the gallows no longer felt like a place of execution, but a place of reckoning. The cell door clanged shut with a heavy finality behind Wyatt Wyke Mercer. The iron bars echoed the weight that had long since settled in his bones. He stood still for a moment, letting the dark and damp of the jail soak into his skin like an old song he thought he'd forgotten. He wasn't always like this. Once he'd ridden fast and free, known across the territories as a master of train heists, a ghost on horseback. The name Wyatt Mercer carried a price in gold and blood. But it had died the night the flames took the passenger train headed north, the one carrying his wife, Mary Ann, and their daughter Ellie. They said it was an accident. Others whispered, Rebel sabotage, blaming folks like Lydia Westwood's kin who refused to sell their land to the railroad syndicates. Wyke knew better. He'd ridden back to the wreckage and seen the unnatural scorch marks, the smell of oil that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't sabotage, it was silencing. He threw away his guns after that, vanished into the mountains, took up a new name, Will Harrow, and lived as a smith, the clang of hammer on iron becoming the only echo he allowed near his heart. But now Lydia was here, set to die the same death those bastards had given his family, unjust, calculated, and cheered on by the crowd. Across the cell, Lydia sat on a cot, back to the wall, her hands shackled but her eyes sharp. They hadn't dulled her spirit yet. "You were supposed to stay gone," she said, her voice flat but layered. "I couldn't. You think this makes it right? Trading places won't bring them back." "I know," he said simply. "But maybe it stops them from taking one more good person." She looked away. The next morning, Sheriff Milton Crane stood outside the bars, smirking like the devil had whispered a private joke in his ear. "Well, well, Wyatt Mercer. Thought you were dust. You sure you want to die for a traitor, Mercer?" Wyke stood slowly. "You hanged my past. I won't let you hang hers too." Crane chuckled. "Poetic. The people love that." He glanced over his shoulder at the watching townsfolk. Some whispered, a few pointing. "Is that him?" one man muttered. "The outlaw who vanished." "No mistaking that scar," another replied. "That's Mercer." The sheriff leaned in close, voice dropping. "You know what this means, don't you? You just handed me your neck on a silver plate." "You always wanted a show," Wyke said. "Now you've got one." Crane's grin faded. "You'll be held here, 2 days, time for posters, invitations. We'll make it official. The traitor's lover and the ghost outlaw, both brought to justice. Like old times." Lydia's chains rattled slightly as she shifted, jaw tight. "He's not your trophy." Crane didn't even look at her. "He's whatever I need him to be." As Crane turned to leave, a hush fell over the corridor. The sheriff paused, then added without turning back, "No visitors, no letters, no prayers. Enjoy your final days, Mercer." The door closed behind him. Wyke looked over at Lydia. She stared down at her hands, wrists red from iron. "They'll put on a parade," she said quietly. "Let them." He sank down on the floor, back to the wall, exhaling slowly. 2 days, she murmured. "That's all we've got." He met her eyes. "Then we better make them count." Inside the dim, musty cell, the lantern hanging outside cast flickering shadows through the barred window. It was past midnight when the guard grumbled open the heavy metal door and shoved Lydia inside. Wyke sat on the narrow cot, arms crossed, shackles still around his wrists. The moment he saw her, he stood. She didn't speak at first, neither did he. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, scanning the shape of the man she thought she'd never see again. "You were supposed to stay gone," she said finally, voice edged with a bitterness she couldn't quite conceal. Wyke lowered his gaze. "I had to come back. You think showing up to die in my place fixes anything?" "I don't think it fixes the past," he said, "but I can try not to repeat it." She turned her back to him, leaning against the cold stone wall. The silence stretched. Then Lydia's voice came, softer. "Crane, he's behind it all." Wyke stepped closer. "Behind what?" "My father's murder. The fire that killed your family. It's all part of the same plan." She looked over her shoulder. "You know he wanted the land. My father refused to sell to the railway. Said they'd poison the stream, uproot our people. So Crane made sure he disappeared. Accused me of killing his deputy when I went to the sheriff's office for help. Had the witnesses bought." Wyke frowned. "Why didn't you run?" "I did. I ran into the mines my father used to work. Lived on roots, slept on rocks, waited till no one came looking anymore. Then I tried to come back and fight. That's when they caught me." Wyke sat down slowly. He's still playing the same game. They both fell quiet again. Outside the window, a gust of wind rattled loose dust from the ceiling. Footsteps passed. Wyke tensed. He moved to the wall and leaned toward the bars. A silhouette moved just beyond the outer lantern's reach. Not a guard's gate. Too careful. Listening. He stepped back and lowered his voice. Someone's out there. Lydia's brow furrowed. One of his men? Maybe. Or someone worse. She crossed her arms, breathing unsteady. Wyke turned to face her fully. Lydia, listen to me. If what you said is true, if Crane burned your father out, killed your family, and framed you, then he's the same devil who lit that fire on the North Line, the one that took Clara, took Ellie. Lydia looked up. You think he's behind that too? I don't believe in coincidences anymore. She nodded slowly. So what now? We get the truth out, he said. Crane wants you dead by dawn 2 nights from now. That gives us 48 hours. She scoffed. And what exactly do we do in 48 hours from inside a jail cell? We won't be inside for long, Wyke said, his voice colder now, edged with resolve. But first, we need to find someone who still remembers what happened and is willing to speak. Lydia hesitated, then whispered, There might be someone. A man named Silas. He used to work for my father. He saw what happened, I think. But after the fire, he vanished. Where would he go? She shook her head. The hills. The old gold mine. If he's still alive, he won't come down easy. Wyke leaned closer. Then we'll find a way to bring him out. But we do this clean. No shootouts. No bodies. You still believe in clean? She asked, incredulous. I believe in justice, he said, even if it comes from a tarnished hand. She didn't respond, but her breathing steadied. Outside, the footsteps returned, retreating this time. Whoever had been eavesdropping was gone, for now. Wyke walked to the cot and sat again, eyes not on Lydia, but on the wall beyond her. They were racing time, and the shadows weren't done moving. Night fell like a closed fist over the jailhouse in Red Hollow. Wind scraped the wooden slats outside, and inside, the quiet between Lydia and Wyke was thick with unspoken fears. I remembered someone, Lydia said finally, voice hushed. Clara Gaines. She was a mail runner back then, fast, clever. Now she's working at the smithy near the rail yard. Wyke shifted on the bench, brows furrowed. The smithy I worked at before I became Will Harrow. She might still remember you. If anyone can carry word out, it's her. Wyke glanced at the barred window. We only have hours, maybe less. Down the hall, the clinking of keys echoed. The night guard approached. An older man, silver hair, with a limp in his right leg. Sergeant Albie Rourke. Wyke stood and waited until the man was within earshot. You still play cards with ghosts, Albie? Rourke froze. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Well, I'll be, he murmured. Wyatt Mercer. I thought you were long gone. I was. Then she happened. Rourke looked to Lydia, then back at Wyke. She worth your neck? I lost my family to this same game once. I am not losing another innocent. Rourke studied him a moment longer. Say what you need. Wyke scribbled a symbol on a piece of oilskin, just a crude hawk scratched in charcoal, no names. He rolled it tight, sealed it with candle wax, and slid it into a hollow reed. Delivery man comes in the morning. Water barrels, slip this into the side spout. You're trusting old bones, Rourke warned. Wyke's gaze was steady. I'm trusting the war didn't kill your conscience. That dawn, as the barrels rolled from jail to smithy, Clara found the message wedged in the seam. The hawk mark stopped her breath cold. She hadn't seen that sign in 8 years. She hurried to the back room, unsealed it, and read the numbers carved into the wax. 372. Coordinates. A signal. Wyke Mercer was alive and in trouble. She didn't hesitate. She left her apron hanging and made her way to the train yard. Jonas, 2 teeth, was hunched over crates, grumbling at the cold. When he saw Clara, his scowl faded. What brings the queen of ink stains? Wyke's in a cage. Jonas blinked. He's dead. No. And he needs help. They moved to a quiet shed by the tracks. Clara explained the plan, fast and sharp. Jonas listened, face tight. When she finished, he chewed the inside of his cheek. "Hell," he muttered. "He did save my neck from the noose once. Guess I owe him." "We do this right," Clara said. "No blood needs spilling." "And if we do it wrong?" Jonas asked. "Then we vanish like smoke." They agreed. The execution would be by train. Sheriff Crane, eager for a public show, would escort Wyke through Red Hollow to the Southern Court. That gave them a route and a weakness. Back at the jail, Clara disguised herself in a cleaner's bonnet and smock, her figure hidden under baskets of bread and stew. At the gate, Rourke nodded once, silent approval. Inside, she moved swiftly. Lydia was alone in her cell. As she set down the food, she whispered, "Lift the back brick after dark." Under the bread, a hand-drawn map, tracks, train time, blind turns in the canyon. Lydia did not speak. She only touched Clara's hand once before the woman left. That night, under a sliver moon, Lydia waited for the guard change. Her fingers found the loose stone under her cot. Inside, the paper still dry. She studied it by feel, each line memorized. Tomorrow, they would ride toward execution. But not all trains reached the gallows. Some led home. The night was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting the Wyoming landscape in cold, metallic shadow. Inside the holding station, Sheriff Crane adjusted the silver buttons of his coat, admiring the polish of his boots in the lantern light. "This will be a parade of justice," he declared to his deputies. "Let the people see what happens when traitors and outlaws defy order." Wyatt, Wyke, Mercer, chained and silent, sat in the back of the prisoner wagon, eyes closed, listening to the metal creak with every wheel turn. His hands were bound, his shoulders sore, but his mind was sharp. 2 nights had passed since Clara had slipped Lydia the map. Everything now rested on perfect timing. The train was waiting at the edge of town, steaming like a beast in slumber. Clara stood near the loading ramp, her hair tied in a tight bun, apron stained like any servant's. To the untrained eye, she was just another kitchen hand delivering lunch to the escort crew. But her pocket held more than bread. It held distraction. Jonas Two Teeth was already aboard, disguised as a cargo foreman. He had marked the latch connecting the 3rd and 4th car, the one that held Wyke and the guards. The train chugged forward as the sun dipped below the ridge. Somewhere between mile marker 12 and the abandoned mines, Clara lit a bundle of dried sage in a tin box and tossed it into the coal burner. Within minutes, thick smoke filled the engine cabin, forcing the engineer to slow and pull onto the switch track, a previously sabotaged route Jonas had manipulated hours earlier. Inside the prisoner car, Wyke felt the lurch as the train slowed. He leaned forward, whispering, "Now." In the medical car, Lydia's performance had already begun. She had torn open the bandage Clara gave her and pressed it into a corner of the iron bunk. Blood trickled down her palm. As planned, she collapsed onto the floor, motionless. The attending deputy banged the door open, yelling for help. In the chaos, Clara slipped inside with a basin, then guided Lydia through the side door and into the adjacent freight car. Simultaneously, Jonas climbed the exterior railings, tools clutched in his teeth. He found the connector bar, loosened the pin with practiced hands, and signaled Clara below with a tap. The cars behind began to slow as the engine pulled forward. The split was clean. Back in the prisoner car, Wyke snapped into motion. The deputy closest to him was still recovering from the shift. With a headbutt, Wyke broke the man's nose and wrenched the keys from his belt. As bullets fired outside, he unlocked the cuffs, grabbed the fallen rifle, and ducked under cover. Crane, now aware something was wrong, stormed down the corridor. He reached the freight car, just as the train rounded a bend. "Where is she?" he roared. Wyke stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. "She's where your lies can't reach." A shot rang out. Crane fired first, grazing Wyke's arm. Wyke fired back, hitting Crane's shoulder. Clara screamed as splinters flew around her. Lydia, crouched behind crates, crawled toward the back exit. Wyke covered her retreat, laying down fire as Crane staggered and vanished into the next car. With the train jolting, Clara pulled Lydia through the rear gate and down the emergency ladder. "Jump!" Jonas shouted from below. They landed in a patch of grass by the mine's old access path. Wyke followed last, leaping just before a final jolt ripped the car from the track. The caboose derailed, crashing in sparks and screeching metal. The remaining escort team scrambled, but it was too late. Breathing hard, bleeding but alive, the four of them ran into the trees. Not as fugitives. As survivors, with the truth finally within reach. The mountains breathed cold mist as Lydia and Wyke helped Silas emerge from the cave he had called shelter for more than a decade. His beard was gray, tangled, and his back was hunched, but his grip on the leather-bound journal in his arms was steady, the last relic of truth he had vowed to protect. They traveled by night, avoiding the patrols still loyal to Crane. The horse-drawn cart they borrowed rattled with each bump along the path, but none of them spoke. The journal, the map, and Silas's memories were their only shield. They reached Cheyenne, a larger town with a courthouse, and more importantly, a federal presence. At the edge of town, Wyke pulled the reins. "We go to Orville Trent. He's the only lawyer who ever gave a damn about frontier justice." Lydia nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter. She had changed out of the prisoner's dress and now wore a plain brown coat, but her eyes still held the fight of the gallows in them. They found Orville Trent in a small, dusty office above a feed store. He was an older man with sun-spotted skin, spectacles, and a reputation for filing lawsuits that never reached the end of the line. He looked up as the three entered and raised a brow. "I thought they hanged you," he said to Lydia. "They tried," she replied. Wyke stepped forward. "We have something that can turn the tide." Orville listened as Silas spoke, his voice slow, brittle but unshakable. He detailed how he had witnessed Crane's men confront Lydia's father, how the offer to buy the land had turned violent when refused, and how the house was set on fire with Lydia's family still inside. Silas opened the journal. "He wrote everything," he said, pointing to the ink-faded pages. "Names, meetings, even Crane's own threats." Orville flipped through it, his finger pausing at a crude sketch of the land deed, complete with a forged signature bearing the same hand as multiple other documents Trent had seen in old court filings. Silas pulled out a second piece, a map of the Westwood property, annotated by her father, showing the location of a gold vein, the real reason for the violence. "They wanted to bury the evidence under the new railway," Silas added, "and bury us with it." Orville's face hardened. He stood, dusted off his coat, and walked to the window. This is enough," he said. "I will reopen the case." Lydia stepped forward. "There's no time. Crane will move again. He has men loyal to him, even out here." Trent turned back. "Then we make it public. I will file an emergency motion with the territorial circuit. We will force a suspension of your execution order." Within an hour, a rider was dispatched carrying the documents. Orville wrote up the appeal with trembling hands, quoting not just Silas's account, but decades of land disputes all linked to Crane's fraudulent dealings. By nightfall, a wire came back. Execution order suspended. Investigation launched. Arrest warrant pending for Milton Crane. Lydia sat down, her breath shivering. Wyke stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said. "We did." And Silas carried the weight longer than anyone should. Silas only smiled and looked out the window. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer buried beneath the ground. It was marching toward daylight. The sky was just beginning to lighten when the sound of boots and hooves thundered through the town square. A convoy of federal marshals rode in, dust and silence trailing behind them like a warning. Horses snorted and stamped. Leather creaked. Guns gleamed on holsters worn by men who did not smile. The weight of authority hung over them like a storm ready to break. Sheriff Crane stood at the center of the courthouse steps, flanked by two of his most loyal deputies. His jaw was tight, his fingers twitching near the butt of his holstered pistol. He hadn't expected trouble, not today, not after everything he had orchestrated. When the lead marshal, a tall man with sun-creased skin and a tin star dulled by long years of real use, dismounted and walked forward, the crowd tensed. He pulled a folded writ from his coat and held it high. "By order of the Territorial Court," he announced, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd, "Sheriff Milton Crane, you are under arrest for conspiracy, falsifying legal documents, abuse of power, and the attempted murder of Lydia Westwood." Crane's face twisted. "This is a mistake," he snapped. "I am the law here." The marshal shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." A breath passed through the crowd like wind before a storm. One of the deputies beside Crane slowly lowered his rifle to the ground. The second looked between the marshal and his superior, then followed suit. The third hesitated, his eyes wide with uncertainty. Then, without a word, he reached for the badge on his chest, turned it over, and let it fall to the dirt before walking away. Crane, left alone on the steps, burned red with rage. His hand moved toward his gun. From the other side of the square, a figure stepped out. Wyke Mercer, still bruised, wrists raw and bloodied, spoke in a low, even voice. "Don't." Crane's eyes locked with his. There was a long, terrible moment, two men with shared blood and older ghosts between them. Then, slowly, Crane's hand fell away from his belt. The marshal moved in and snapped iron cuffs over his wrists. The sound rang out, final and heavy. Behind the line of federal men, Lydia stepped forward. Her boots, worn and dirt-covered, echoed against the boards of the gallows. She climbed the steps, not as a prisoner, but as a survivor. The noose still hung behind her, a symbol of what almost was. She looked out over the town, not pleading, not angry, simply present. People stared in silence. An old woman near the front whispered, "She didn't survive to hide. She survived to fight." The same child who had once asked why she was to be hanged now whispered, "She's not afraid." Lydia descended the platform and crossed to Wyke. He stood waiting, exhausted, but tall. His arms bore the marks of chains, but his shoulders carried no shame. "You're free now," he said. Lydia looked at the town, then at him. "No," she said quietly, "we are." She reached for his hand. He took it. No one applauded, no one spoke, but something settled over the square, something real and lasting. The past hadn't vanished, but justice, finally, had spoken louder than fear. And as the first full light of dawn spread across the roofs and dust and old wood of the town, they stood there, hand in hand, unchained, together. 1 year later, the house at the edge of town stood with a quiet dignity, built from reclaimed timber and layered with stories, its porch wrapped around like a waiting embrace. Light spilled from the windows in the early evening, warm and soft, like the hands that now called this place home. Smoke curled from the blacksmith's chimney, coiling into the pine-kissed air. The sign above the door read, "Mercer Forge and Way Station." The lettering had been etched by hand, not flawless, but firm. Beneath it, the doors remained open to more than just customers. It had become a place for those with nowhere else to go, veterans, widows, orphans, men who had lost their names in the dust of war, and women who had spent too long being silenced. Wyke was at the forge before dawn most days. Shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, scars visible but healed. He swung the hammer, not with rage, but rhythm. The clanging of steel was no longer a warning, it was a heartbeat, a reminder. He often said little while working, but the way he taught Eli, the boy who came daily with dirt under his nails and questions in his eyes, spoke volumes. "Hold the blade steady," Wyke murmured, guiding Eli's grip. "Not like you're fighting it, like you're listening." "Steel talks?" Eli asked, skeptical. "It screams if you treat it wrong," Wyke said. "But if you listen, really listen, it'll tell you what it needs." Behind the forge, Lydia tended the garden and kept the books. Her hands were calloused from soil and ink alike. Each evening, she sat by the window in her wool shawl, the old typewriter clicking softly. She wrote letters. Some she sent, others she sealed and placed in a small cedar box. Apologies, testimonies, stories unfinished. That autumn, people in town began leaving more than coins. A bundle of flour, a knitted scarf, a jar of preserves on the porch. No one rang the bell. No one stayed to talk. But each gift said the same thing. "We see you now. We did not then, but we do now." One afternoon, as the wind picked up and the leaves danced across the dirt road, Lydia sat at her desk. She paused, fingers resting on the keys. "You asked why I stayed," she typed. "Why I did not run once the gallows were dismantled, once the past could no longer reach me. I stayed because this town didn't finish burying me, and maybe it never will. But roots grow deeper when left to struggle, and I have learned to grow where I was planted." Wyke came in quietly, wiping soot from his hands with a rag. He carried 2 mugs of cider, steam curling with the scent of cloves and cinnamon. "You're writing again," he said gently. "I never stopped," she replied, smiling faintly. He set the mugs down, then leaned beside her, glancing at the page. "Do you still think of leaving?" he asked. "Sometimes," Lydia admitted, "but not for long. There's too much here now. Too many stories that still need mending." He nodded, looking past the window. The trees had thinned for winter. A train whistle echoed faintly through the hills. "I used to think I came back just for you," he said. She turned to look at him. "And now, I think I came back to find myself. I didn't know what I was carrying until I laid it down." Lydia reached across the desk, took his hand in hers. "You laid it down, but you didn't walk away. That matters." He chuckled softly. "Well, it's not like I can forge a future without a fire." Outside, a child's laughter rang out as a group ran past the fence. One paused, waved at the porch. Lydia waved back. "They're not afraid of me anymore," she said. "They never should have been," Wyke replied. "But fear's stubborn, takes time to burn out." She placed the finished letter atop a growing stack, then looked at him. "You kept your promise." He nodded. "I meant it." She smiled. "Now it's my turn." As night crept in, they stood together at the porch, mugs in hand, the fire from the forge casting shadows that flickered across the earth like echoes of the past. The train sounded again, far, steady, a reminder that the world kept moving. But for them, here and now, the moment held still. And in that stillness, they remained, not as fugitives, not as survivors, but as something greater. Builders. Keepers of warmth. Proof that even the most wounded stories could be reforged. If you felt your heart stir with every hoofbeat, and every vow kept in the face of a rope, then this tale was meant for you. The sheriff ordered her hanged, until the widowed cowboy said, "I'll take her place," is just one of many stories we bring to life here. For more romances born from gunpowder, grit, and grace in the old American West, don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Every week, we bring you another frontier tale where love rides hard and honor never dies quietly. Stick with us. The next great story is already saddled up.